Now, in our society, um, let's call what the younger son had or was given, let's call that his inheritance, his cut. Okay, let's call it that. Would it have been appropriate in today's society, let's say here in the United States anyway, for the child to demand from the father, cough it up, show me them greens. I want to see some of them dead presidents right now. Yeah, showing me the money. Yeah, that usually won't occur until somebody passes. That's usually the norm. And feelings change in the hearts and minds of people, and sometimes that doesn't materialize. Oh well. So in verse 12, there's a presumption. If you go all the way back to verse 12, it said, the younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. The question I was going to put in your mind, which I kind of already asked, is it God's way that we are so entitled or worthy of an inheritance as to demand it from our Father? It's got about 3 sermons in it or so. Yeah. We're really not in a position to demand an inheritance. Are we worthy? Yeah. Probably looking at the no side of that answer. Yeah, probably not worthy. Okay. I will submit that we, according to God's way, the way of God, I will say that we have an opportunity. I didn't want to use the word right, but all of us have eligibility. I'm sorry? A lifeblood. All of us are heirs if we choose to be. If we choose to submit to Him, follow His ways, do His will, and so on, if we earnestly invest ourselves into that, if our faith is strong enough, we are heirs. Okay, let's go to verse 17. It's kind of got a little revelation here. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I know it's God's will that if we are in a state of sin or if we're doing something that's not according to His will, I know it's God's will to come to our senses. Is that always the case? Okay, as parents, is that always the case? Ken puts his hand down like, well, I can tell you from being a fellow parent, that is not always the case. You want to shake the intelligence into that person, and it just doesn't work that way. At least not for my kid. It didn't work that way. Oh, we would enjoy so much. It is God's way that in a state of turmoil, distress, that we come to our senses. Most of you are familiar with Matthew chapter 18 regarding church discipline. We've talked about it extensively over the last month or so. What is the objective of booting somebody out? Disfellowship. That's exactly what it's for. To get them to come to their senses. It's like, wake up. You have a need of the family. And guess what? We have a need for them too. Okay, they're sinning. God still loves them, so do we. We can love the sinner and hate the sin. In verse 18, there's a bit of what I call a confession. In verse 18, it says, I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. You ever have trouble admitting to yourself that you've sinned, or you've done something wrong or made a bad decision? Have you ever known somebody else to do that? Maybe I should ask it that way. Have you ever known somebody well, they made a bad decision? Wasn't so smart thing to do. They really didn't want to come and face that. They didn't really want to see it. I'm confident that God wants us to admit to ourselves, hey, we made a mistake. Is that always the case, though? Everybody's admitted to their mistake, or yeah, Everybody's admitted to their mistakes, except me. That didn't happen. Okay. Since all of us are upright and forthworthy and stuff like that, let's go down to verse 19. The son conducts an evaluation here. What's the evaluation? He did a little self-evaluation, verse 19. I stumped you all. Okay, verse 19, it says, I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Wow. No longer worthy to be called the son, and we can presume that it is the natural son of this father. What is our status as he is our father? What's our status? Compare that to verse 19. I'm sorry? His children, but it reads, I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Isn't that pretty much our status? We're not worthy to be called his son? I am so glad that he considers us his children. And I kind of like the name children. It puts me right where I belong. Yes, sir? Okay. 1 Corinthians 6. Mm-hmm. Yes. I like your comparison. Let's call it reformed sinners. I think that's the proper correction system term. I'm not entirely certain. Could very easily be. In verse 20. In verse 20, the son is looking for something. So he got up and went to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Now the son was doing the seeking. What was the father doing? Well, yes, he was watching. I like the way you've rephrased that the second time. He was looking for him. Okay. I don't know how far in the Bible it says, but while he was still a long way off. Now, I tried to recognize someone or something at a distance. I just did a little experiment. I got so far away from a person, okay, I can still see in my rearview mirror. Got a little further down the road, it's tough to tell. I was barely a quarter mile, and it was tough to recognize somebody that I already knew was that person. How challenging would it be if you weren't certain the next person coming over the top of the hill a half mile off was or wasn't your son? Now you've got to make this determination. There's no foreknowledge like I had that said, yep, that's that person, I believe him or her to be. Okay. Yeah, I don't know how long way off is, but I do know one thing. In order for the father to see the son first, what had to happen? We already said he was looking for him, that's true. What maintained his vigil? There you go. He wanted to find him. He wanted the son to return. There you go. The love of the Father maintained that vigil. that's the energy supplied for it. That said, I'm looking for you, and I'm still looking. I don't know how often he looked. I don't know if he did it once a day, twice a day, an hour straight, a couple hours a day, maybe all hours of daylight. I have no idea. But to ensure that he found that son first, I mean, that speaks, oh wow, volumes. The son said to him, Father, verse 21. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Now, something else I see right here. First thing I see is that it's a repeat. Anybody see where that's repeated from? How about verse 19? I am no longer worthy to be called your son. I have sinned against you. In verse 18, I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. And in verse 19, I am no longer worthy to be called your son. We have a little bit of integrity here. That's kind of nice. I don't know if we could have described the younger son with integrity before he left. But upon his return, he stated before that he would say that to his father. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And that's exactly what he says to his father when he meets him. In verses 22 and 23, what do you esteem the value of the son to be? Verses 22 and 23, how can we read how the father esteemed the value of his son? Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right. Now, well, you summed it up pretty good, Jerry. That's pretty good. If you look, not only that, but the father said to his servants, quick. Yeah, make a beeline for it. Don't waste any time. Bring the best robe and put it on him. There's every possibility that if he was feeding pigs and no one gave him anything, that he probably wasn't he was ripe. I mean, let's face it, there's not much chance of a shower back then. I don't know, but chances are the hygiene was kind of lacking. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. As you know, sandals kind of let your feet breathe. And putting the ring on somebody's finger, what does that signify? There you go. Kind of like this, I is owned. Okay. Ownership's a good word. The ring was usually some kind of, I don't want to say mark, because I don't want it to sound like property. But at the same time, if I say to my wife, if I say, "Hun, you're mine," we get the indication of value. So that's a good thing. All right. I wouldn't go that far unless you were talking about my wife over me. Then yeah, I might say that. But what, Larry? Do you have something? Yes. That's right. In the parable, that was one of the ones I'd considered using for this topic. In that parable, the importance of the one became very evident, just like the importance of this one is evident. We tend to place a value on certain things. A lot of it's by quantity. A lot of it's by money. That's just the way we do it. As God's children, we may not recognize how blessed we are. We actually have more resources at our disposal than we might realize. The problem is, we only work with the ones we're conscious of. Well, it stands to reason. Faith is what allows us to work with the ones that we're not aware of, at least not yet. So, we also see an unconditional love on behalf of the Father. God loves us in the same way. I put down, one of these notes I put down, when do we sever ties with children who are practicing sin? Each of us answers that in our own hearts and minds in our own way. We all have our thresholds, our limits, things like that. Do we ever stop loving them? Children, of course, from as so many fellow parents I see here, children can frustrate us beyond belief. Oh, they can turn our world upside down with worry, with yes, I'm describing you. No, I'm with things like worry, fear on behalf of the parent for the child, and it's a peculiar thing that we as youths were just as indestructible, and immortal as we thought we were. We just knew that until the first thing comes along. A father's perspective in verse 24. He says, "For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Was the son dead? Well, that's correct. The son wasn't physically dead, but he's alive again. He was lost and is found. That's a little more physically comparable. What does it mean, was dead and is alive again? Oh, I keep reading my lesson plan. That's exactly what I had. He was gone. Well, that's more physically lost. But he was separated from the Father. He severed communication or ties with the father, with the family, of course, the older brother. It doesn't say anything in the text about him writing a letter once in a while. Hey, Dad, how you doing? He just squandered his money. And let's face it, who wouldn't want to squander somebody else's money? Hey, buy you a drink. Hey, all right, go on. Pass out the bucks, fill them up. It's in the wild living and stuff like that. It's too bad that we, as God's children, must occasionally reach the very bottom, the pits, before we realize and wake up, oh my goodness, there was something all along that I had. Okay. Is it not the nature of mankind to get to his or her lowest spot before they discover, hey, and you know that answer is usually sitting there all along. It's just waiting to be learned. I want you to keep in mind in verse 24, I just wanted to keep in mind the phrase in there. I want to make a comparison a little bit later. Verse 28 says, the older brother became angry and refused to go in, and so his father went out and pleaded with him. What similarity do you notice in that one verse? He did want both kids, but what did you see in there? Go ahead. That's it. He went out, just like he did when the younger son came, when he was looking for the younger son. He went out to the older son, just like he did before. This shows a great deal of care on behalf of the father. The father is not going to wait, even when he knows he's in the right. According to man's laws, according to God's laws, he is in the right. He has the higher moral ground. Fantastic. He is still willing, humbly, to go out to us, to reach for us, just like this father did, twice in the same story. It's conceivable the older brother may have felt some kind of jealousy, envy, anger, maybe even hatred. Is that God's way? Yeah, we can easily say no. That's not God's way. I would say it is the normal practice of mankind by his nature to feel that way. As many of us know, it takes a lifetime of conditioning and research and practice in the Bible of God's will, of God's Word, in order to reach a state like this. to where he would be rejoicing with his father at the return of his brother. Well, we find what we perceive to be a little bit of justification there when his older brother became angry and refused to go in. Now, in verses 29 through 30, but he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeying your orders." Wow. When's the last time your kid did that? I can tell you mine didn't. That's all I can tell you. Yet you never gave me a young goat. Oh, yeah. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fatted calf for him. Why does the older brother feel secure in his position? He puts up a good logical comparison. Why does the older brother feel very confident, very assured about his position on the issue? Okay, how? Well, Christ was an exceptionally good sport, too. The Jews, under Mosaic law, the Jews were, for lack of a better phrase, greater than thou. They were the supreme. They were the highest. That's in their minds. And the Gentiles were very low lives. Heathenistic, didn't practice the law. Of course, we're talking about law under Moses. We have a kind of a greater than thou attitude here as well. All these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. What does it illustrate about that son's attitude? I've been slaving for you, never disobeyed your orders. Is he trying to work his way into the favor in his father's eyes? Can we work our way to heaven? Would be a tough word. Go ahead. You owe me. That's a good one. There seems to be some due compensation for all the slavery. That's what he says. All the work that the older son has done, all the obedience that he's conducted. Now, we as parents can recognize the value of obedience. Okay. When we receive the obedience of our children, the gray doesn't show up so quickly on our hair, assuming you have hair. I'm losing mine fast. But that entitlement, isn't that what we're seeing right now, especially in our society? Isn't that an entitlement, especially in our youth? I emphasize that not to anybody's discredit, but that seems to be the going trend. Okay, that's one I was going to get into later. Oh, no. Darlene makes an excellent observation, which I was going to get into later, but since she disclosed it, I'm going to emphasize it. If you remember the parable about the landowner and how it was harvest time, goes into town very early. I think that was my back. Oh yeah, oh man. Anyway, he goes into town very early. This is supposedly like about 6 a.m. ish, and he gets some workers, and he hires some people. And about 9, he does the same thing. About he does I think about 11 or 12 or 1, and then 3, and then 5 o'clock. Now 5 o'clock p.m. is about an hour before quitting time. That's just kind of how it worked. So that was your daylight hours, 6 to 6, and he lined up everybody and gave the people who had worked only about an hour, very short time, their wages. He gave them a full day's wage. Okay, a full day's wage for that brief amount of work. Well, the people that had been there the earliest thought, "Oh, right, man, I am entitled. All right, I'm gonna get more than that. Oh, I can't wait to see what's coming to me." And they got a full day's wage. The analogy there is that it's God's way. The rationale provided by the landowner was, didn't you agree to work for 1 day's wage? Isn't that what you have received? take what is yours